The lightning split the sky like a jagged knife, illuminating the desert landscape in brilliant white flashes as Penelope Kane desperately urged her horse forward through the howling wind and sand. She had been traveling from Tucson to meet her uncle in Wickenburg, Arizona, when the storm descended upon her with a fury she had never witnessed in her 22 years of life. The wind tore at her traveling dress, and her horse whinnied in terror as tumbleweeds larger than wagon wheels rolled past them like demons in the darkening afternoon of June 1878. Penelope could barely see 10 feet ahead through the wall of dust and debris. Her eyes burned, her throat felt coated in grit, and her fingers ached from gripping the reins so tightly. She had foolishly left the last trading post 3 hours earlier, ignoring the warnings from the old man, who had tried to tell her that the sky looked wrong. She thought she could make Wickenburg before nightfall, but nature had other plans. The horse stumbled, and Penelope felt herself sliding from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. Through the screaming wind, she heard her horse galloping away, taking with it her supplies, her water, and her only means of transportation across the unforgiving Arizona desert. Panic seized her chest as she struggled to her feet, only to be knocked down again by a violent gust that felt strong enough to tear her apart. She crawled toward what looked like the shadow of rocks, hoping for any kind of shelter from the punishing storm. Sand filled her mouth, her nose, her ears. Every breath was a battle. Her hands scraped against sharp stones and thorny plants, but she kept moving, driven by pure survival instinct. The world had become nothing but noise and pain, and the terrible realization that she might die out here alone, her body buried beneath the shifting sands. Then she felt hands, strong and certain, gripping her arms and pulling her upward. Through the stinging sand, she could make out the silhouette of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face wrapped in a bandana. He shouted something she could not hear over the wind, then lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. She felt herself being carried, and she clung to his shirt, her fingers finding solid warmth amid the chaos. He brought her to a rocky outcropping she had not seen, a small cave carved into the base of a hill by centuries of wind and rain. Inside, the roar of the storm became muffled, almost distant. He set her down gently on the sandy floor and immediately moved to cover the entrance with his own body, positioning himself between her and the worst of the blowing sand. Penelope coughed violently, expelling grit from her lungs. Her whole body shook, partly from cold despite the desert heat, partly from the shock of nearly dying. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to control her breathing, each inhale still raspy and painful. The man turned to look at her, pulling the bandana down from his face. In the dim light filtering through the storm, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of the sky on a clear day, standing out dramatically against his tanned face. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep but gentle, with the slight drawl common to men who had spent their lives in the West. Penelope shook her head, then realized that might not be entirely true. She looked down at her hands and saw they were scraped and bleeding. Her dress was torn in several places, and she could feel a dozen small pains across her body that would likely become bruises. "I do not think anything is broken," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from the sand. "My horse ran off," he nodded, his expression serious. "Storm spooked mine too about a mile back. He is trained to return to the ranch, so at least someone will know something is wrong out here." He reached for a canteen at his belt and offered it to her. Small sips, not too much at once. The water was warm but tasted like salvation. Penelope forced herself to drink slowly, though every fiber of her being wanted to gulp it down. She handed it back to him with a murmured thanks. "Jacob Steele," he said, extending his hand. "I run cattle about 10 miles north of Wickenburg." "Penelope Kane." She placed her scraped hand in his, noting how carefully he held it, mindful of her injuries. "I was trying to reach Wickenburg before the storm hit. I suppose that was foolish. Desert storms come up fast." His tone held no judgment. "You could not have known if you are not from around here. I am from Pennsylvania. I arrived in Arizona Territory only 3 weeks ago." She looked toward the cave entrance, where sand continued to blast past. "How long do these storms usually last?" "This one." Jacob moved to sit against the cave wall, positioning himself so he could watch both her and the entrance. "Could be an hour, could be till morning. Hard to say, but we are safe enough here for now." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not in front of this stranger who had saved her life. But the reality of her situation was settling over her like a weight. She had been so confident, so certain she could handle traveling alone in this new land. Her uncle had offered to send an escort from Wickenburg, but she had insisted she could manage the journey from Tucson on her own. Pride, her mother had always said, would be her downfall. "Hey," Jacob's voice was softer now, "you are alive. That is what matters. Because of you." She met his eyes, needing him to understand. "If you had not found me, I would have died out there." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady and assessing. "I was heading back to my ranch when I saw your horse go past without a rider, figured someone was in trouble. Just happened to be in the right place. Or I was in the right place, despite being in entirely the wrong place to begin with." Penelope surprised herself with a shaky laugh. "I am not usually so careless. Desert takes getting used to." Jacob pulled a small pouch from his vest pocket. "I have some jerky here if you are hungry. It is not much, but it will help." Penelope realized she was famished. She had eaten a small breakfast that morning and nothing since. She accepted a piece of the dried meat and chewed it slowly, finding it salty and surprisingly flavorful. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside their small shelter. Penelope studied Jacob when she thought he was not looking. His clothes were worn but well maintained, his boots scuffed from hard use. He wore a gun belt with a well-used revolver, and his hat, which he had set aside when they entered the cave, was sweat-stained and shaped by years of wear. Everything about him spoke of a man who worked hard and lived honestly. "How long have you been ranching in Arizona?" she asked, wanting to fill the silence with something other than the howling wind. "About 5 years now. Came out from Texas after my father died. He left me enough money to buy some land and start a small herd." Jacob took a drink from the canteen, then offered it to her again. "It is not much yet, but it is mine. Every year I add a few more head of cattle, expand the grazing land a little, hoping to have a real operation within another 5 years or so." "That sounds like a good dream," Penelope said sincerely. "My uncle runs a dry goods store in Wickenburg. He wrote to my father after my mother died, offering me a position helping him run the business. Said Arizona Territory was a land of opportunity. I am sorry about your mother." The simple condolence, delivered without elaborate sympathy, touched Penelope more than she expected. "Thank you. It has been 6 months now. The house felt too empty with just me and my father, and he works long hours at his law practice. Uncle Thomas's offer seemed like a chance to start fresh somewhere new. Wickenburg is a good town, growing fast with the mining operations in the area. Your uncle's store does well, I imagine. You know him." "Everyone knows Thomas Kane. He is fair in his prices and does not try to cheat folks. That counts for a lot out here." Jacob shifted his position, stretching out his long legs. "You will do fine in Wickenburg once you get there." "If I get there?" Penelope looked down at her ruined dress. "I have lost my horse, my supplies, everything I packed for the journey. All I have left is what I am wearing, and that is barely fit to be called clothing anymore. Your horse might turn up. Sometimes they do once the storm passes. And if not, we will figure something out. My ranch is closer than Wickenburg. We can head there once it is safe to travel, get you cleaned up and rested. Then I will take you to your uncle myself." The casual way he said it, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to extend such hospitality to a complete stranger, made Penelope's chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. "You do not have to do that. You have already done so much. Out here, we look after each other. It is not charity just how things are done." He met her eyes, and she saw absolute certainty in his gaze. "Besides, I would not feel right sending you off alone again, not after pulling you out of that storm." Penelope felt something shift inside her, a warmth that had nothing to do with escaping the cold wind. "Then I accept with gratitude, and I will repay you somehow, I promise. No need for that talk, just rest now. You have been through an ordeal." But Penelope found she did not want to rest. Despite everything that had happened, or perhaps because of it, she felt strangely alert, alive in a way she had not experienced in months. The grief that had wrapped around her since her mother's death seemed to have been blown away by the same wind that had nearly killed her. "Tell me about your ranch," she said. "What is it like?" Jacob looked surprised by her interest but smiled slightly, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. "It is not fancy. Just a small house I built myself, a barn for the horses and a few thousand acres of grazing land. I have about 200 head of cattle right now, plus a remuda of horses. I employ 3 hands full-time, good men who know their business. We work hard, but it is satisfying work, watching something grow that you built from nothing. I think I understand that, or I want to anyway. I have spent my whole life in Philadelphia, where everything is already built, already established. The idea of creating something new, of having that kind of freedom, it appeals to me greatly. Philadelphia." Jacob said the word as though tasting it. "That is about as far from Arizona territory as you can get and still be in the same country. In more ways than just distance." Penelope smiled. "We have theaters and museums, restaurants and shops on every corner, but we also have crowds and noise and a certain suffocation of expectation. Everyone knows everyone else's business. Every action is judged against rigid standards of propriety. Sounds exhausting." It was. Penelope was surprised by her own honesty. She barely knew this man, yet found herself speaking freely in a way she rarely did even with longtime acquaintances. Perhaps it was the storm, the isolation, the strange intimacy of 2 people sheltering together against nature's fury. "I suppose that is part of why I jumped at Uncle Thomas's offer. I wanted to go somewhere I could breathe, where I could be more than just the grieving daughter of Edmund Kane, Esquire. Out here, you can be whoever you want to be." Jacob's voice held a note of understanding. "That is the real opportunity of the West. Not gold or land or cattle, but the chance to write your own story." Before Penelope could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind sent a spray of sand into the cave, forcing them both to turn away and cover their faces. When the blast subsided, Jacob moved to block more of the entrance with his body, arranging his coat across part of the opening. "Are you cold?" he asked, glancing back at her. Penelope realized she was shivering. The temperature had dropped significantly as the sun set somewhere beyond the storm clouds. Her torn dress provided little protection, and the desert night air was surprisingly chilly. "A little," she admitted, Without hesitation, Jacob shrugged out of his vest and handed it to her. "Put this on. I am used to the temperature changes out here. But then you will be cold. I will manage. Please take it." Penelope accepted the vest, still warm from his body heat. It smelled of leather and sage and something else, something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken inexplicably. She wrapped it around her shoulders, grateful for the added warmth. "Thank you. For everything. For saving me, for sharing your supplies, for treating me with such kindness." She looked directly at him, wanting him to see her sincerity. "I know you said it is just how things are done out here, but not all men would be so decent. I am aware of that." Jacob held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in those blue eyes. Any decent man would have done the same. "I am not sure that is true, but I will not argue with you." Penelope pulled the vest tighter around herself. "Where did you learn to be so self-sufficient? Was it from your father? Some from him, some from necessity. After my mother died when I was 12, it was just me and my father. He taught me everything he knew about ranching, about surviving on your own, about being a man of your word. When he passed, I had to figure out the rest myself." Jacob's expression grew distant, lost in memory. "He would have liked you, I think. He always said the strongest people were the ones willing to admit when they needed help. I needed help today, desperately." Penelope's voice caught slightly. "I have never been so frightened in my entire life. But you kept moving. You did not give up, even when you were knocked down. That takes courage, or stubbornness. My mother always said I was too stubborn for my own good. Out here, stubborn keeps you alive." Jacob smiled again, and Penelope found herself wanting to see that smile more often. It softened all the hard lines of his face, revealed a warmth that clearly ran deep beneath his weathered exterior. They talked through the night as the storm continued its assault on the desert. Penelope learned that Jacob had fought briefly in skirmishes against Apaches when he first arrived in Arizona territory, though he spoke of it with regret rather than pride. He told her about building his house board by board, about losing his first herd to rustlers and having to start over, about the satisfaction of watching the sun rise over land that belonged to him. In turn, Penelope found herself sharing things she had told no one else. She spoke of her mother's long illness, of holding her hand as she slipped away, of the guilt she felt for sometimes being relieved when it was finally over. She talked about her strained relationship with her father, a good man but emotionally distant, more comfortable with legal briefs than with his grieving daughter. She confessed her fears about starting over in Wickenburg, about whether she had the strength to build a new life in such a foreign place. Jacob listened to all of it without judgment, occasionally asking a question but mostly just providing a steady, reassuring presence. Penelope realized she had not felt this comfortable with anyone in a very long time, possibly ever. There was something about this cowboy, this near stranger who had pulled her from a storm, that made her want to lower all her carefully constructed walls. As the night deepened and the storm finally began to lose its fury, exhaustion crept over Penelope. Her eyes grew heavy despite her desire to keep talking, to learn more about this fascinating man who had appeared in her life so dramatically. "You should sleep," Jacob said gently, noticing her fighting to stay awake. "We will likely be here until dawn and you need rest. What about you? I will keep watch, make sure the storm is really passing and that we are truly safe here. That does not seem fair. I am used to long nights." "Really, it is fine." Penelope wanted to protest further, but another yawn overtook her. She settled against the cave wall, trying to find a comfortable position on the sandy floor. It was impossible. "Here." Jacob moved to sit beside her. "You can lean against me if you want. It will be more comfortable than the rock." Penelope hesitated only a moment before accepting his offer. She shifted to rest against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. It should have felt awkward, inappropriate even, but instead it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "You are my shelter now," she murmured sleepily, the words slipping out before she could think better of them. She felt Jacob go very still beside her, then slowly relax. "I suppose I am," he said quietly. "Get some rest, Penelope." She closed her eyes, and for the first time since her mother's death, she felt truly safe. The storm still howled outside, but here in this small cave, with Jacob's warmth against her side and his steady presence beside her, the world seemed a little less frightening. When Penelope woke, sunlight was streaming into the cave, and she was alone. For a panicked moment, she thought Jacob had left her, but then she heard his voice outside and relaxed. She stood carefully, her body stiff and sore from the ordeal and from sleeping on the ground. Looking down, she saw she still wore his vest over her ruined dress. She emerged from the cave into a transformed world. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a crystal-clear morning and a desert landscape rearranged by the wind. Jacob stood about 20 yards away, his back to her, looking out over the terrain. "Good morning," Penelope called, her voice still rough from breathing so much dust the day before. Jacob turned and his face broke into that rare smile. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Like I was dragged behind a horse for several miles, but alive and grateful for it." She walked over to join him, noting how he automatically moved to ensure she was standing on stable ground. "What is the plan now?" "We start walking north toward my ranch. It is about 8 miles from here. We will take it slow, rest when we need to. I left markers years ago along this route for situations like this, so I know we are headed in the right direction." He studied her face with concern. "Think you can manage 8 miles? "I can manage whatever I need to manage." Penelope met his eyes with determination. "Lead the way, Mr. Steele." "Jacob, please. I think we are past formalities after sharing a cave through a storm." "Then you must call me Penelope, or Penny if you prefer. My mother always called me Penny. Penelope suits you better." The way he said her full name, with that slight drawl and complete sincerity, made something flutter in her chest. "Ready." They set off across the desert, Jacob setting a steady but manageable pace. The morning air was cool but warming quickly as the sun climbed higher. Penelope was grateful. She had worn sturdy boots for traveling, though even they were not really designed for miles of walking across rough terrain. Jacob proved to be an attentive companion. He pointed out various plants and their uses, showed her how to spot signs of water, taught her to read the landscape the way he did. When she stumbled over loose rocks, his hand was immediately there to steady her. When the sun grew too hot, he fashioned a makeshift sunshade from his bandana. They stopped to rest in the shade of a massive saguaro cactus, sharing the last of Jacob's water. "Your ranch hands will be surprised when you show up with a strange woman," Penelope observed, trying to keep her tone light despite her growing anxiety about the situation. What would people think? She was traveling alone with a man she had just met, about to arrive at his ranch with no chaperone, no luggage, dressed in tatters. In Philadelphia, such a scandal would ruin a woman's reputation beyond repair. Jacob seemed to read her thoughts. "My men are good sorts. They will not gossip or make assumptions. And there is a woman at the ranch, Maria. She is the wife of my foreman, Tomaz. She helps with cooking and other household tasks. She will help you get cleaned up, and I am sure she can lend you some proper clothes. You have thought of everything. Just trying to make this easier for you. I know this is not how you planned your journey to end." "No," Penelope agreed, "but perhaps it is how it was meant to end. If I had made it to Wickenburg yesterday as planned, I would never have met you." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight that surprised them both. Jacob looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I am glad I met you," he said simply. "Even if the circumstances were not ideal, I am glad too." They continued walking, and Penelope found herself stealing glances at Jacob when she thought he was not looking. In the clear light of day, she could see details she had missed in the dim cave. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it needed cutting, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard labor. Everything about him spoke of strength, reliability, and a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was. And she found herself attracted to him in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. It had been less than 24 hours since he had pulled her from the storm, yet she felt connected to him in a way that defied logic. Was it just gratitude, the intensity of their shared experience? Or was it something more, something real and profound that she had never experienced before? "Jacob," she said impulsively. "Do you believe in fate?" He considered the question seriously. "I think some things are meant to happen. Whether you call that fate or God's will or just chance, I do not know, but I have learned not to question when something feels right." He looked at her directly. "Why do you ask?" "Because this feels right somehow. Walking across the desert with you, talking to you, trusting you. It should feel strange or frightening, but it does not. It feels like exactly where I am supposed to be." Jacob stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I feel that too. From the moment I pulled you into that cave, something changed. I cannot explain it, but I do not want to question it either." They stood there in the desert morning, looking at each other, and Penelope felt something shift and settle into place, like a key turning in a lock. This man, this cowboy who had saved her from the storm, had become something more than her rescuer. He was becoming essential. "We should keep moving," Jacob said finally, but his voice was rough with emotion. "Still have a few miles to go." The rest of the journey passed in a comfortable silence, though Penelope was acutely aware of Jacob's presence beside her. Every accidental brush of their hands sent electricity through her. Every time he helped her navigate difficult terrain, she felt the strength in his touch. By the time the ranch came into view in the distance, she was both relieved and disappointed that their time alone together was ending. Jacob's ranch was modest, but well-maintained, exactly as he had described. The house was small, built from wood with a covered porch, and the barn was sturdy and freshly painted. Penelope could see cattle grazing in the distance and several horses in a corral near the barn. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, his weathered face breaking into a smile of relief when he saw Jacob. "Boss, we were worried sick." He was older, perhaps 50, with graying hair and kind eyes. "Your horse came back without you yesterday afternoon, right when that storm hit. We were about to organize a search party." "I am fine, Tomas. I found someone who needed help." Jacob gestured to Penelope. "This is Miss Penelope Kane. She was caught in the storm as well. Penelope, this is Tomas Reyes, my foreman and the man who actually keeps this place running." Tomas tipped his hat respectfully. "Miss Kane, welcome to the Steele Ranch. You look like you have been through quite an ordeal." "That is an understatement," Penelope said, managing a smile despite her exhaustion. "Your employer saved my life yesterday. I am very grateful to be here." "Let me get Maria." Tomas called toward the house, and a moment later, a woman emerged. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair streaked with gray and a motherly face that broke into concern when she saw Penelope's condition. "You poor dear." Maria hurried over, her accent marking her as a native Spanish speaker. "Come inside right away. You need food, water, and a proper bath. Jacob, you should be ashamed, making her walk all the way from wherever you found her." "We did not have much choice," Jacob protested mildly, but Maria was already ushering Penelope toward the house. "Come, come. Men never understand what a woman needs. We will get you fixed up properly." Penelope looked back over her shoulder at Jacob, who gave her an encouraging nod. Then she was inside the house, and Maria was fussing over her like a mother hen. The next few hours passed in a blur of welcome activity. Maria heated water for a bath, provided fresh clothes that fit reasonably well, and fed Penelope a substantial meal of eggs, beans, and fresh bread. While Penelope ate, Maria examined her scraped hands and treated them with a salve that smelled strongly of herbs but immediately soothed the pain. "You are very lucky Jacob found you," Maria said as she worked. "The desert is not forgiving, especially to those who do not know her ways." "I am learning that." Penelope winced as Maria cleaned a particularly deep scrape. "I was foolish to travel alone. Perhaps, but you survived, and that is what matters. Jacob is a good man. He would not have rested until he found whoever was in trouble. You have worked for him long." 3 years now. Tamaz and I came here when Jacob was just getting started. He needed help, we needed work and a place to settle. It has been good for all of us. Maria smiled warmly. "He is like a son to us now. We worry about him, working so hard, always alone." "A man needs more in life than cattle and land." Penelope heard the unspoken message in those words. "He seems happy with his life. He seems content. But content is not the same as happy, is it?" Maria tied off the bandage on Penelope's hand with a gentle pat. "There. You will heal quickly, I think. You have a strong spirit. Thank you, Maria, for everything. It is my pleasure. Now you should rest. That bed in the spare room is freshly made. Sleep as long as you need." But Penelope found she did not want to sleep despite her exhaustion. She wanted to see Jacob again, to talk to him more, to continue whatever had begun between them in that cave. The intensity of her desire surprised her. She was not usually so impulsive, so quick to feel. But everything about this situation was different from anything she had experienced before. She found him on the porch, cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes, staring out at his land with an expression of contentment. He turned when he heard the door open, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "You look much better," he said. "Maria took good care of you. She is wonderful. You are lucky to have her and Tamaz." Penelope moved to stand beside him at the porch railing. "This is a beautiful place, Jacob. I can see why you love it. It is home." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "You are welcome to stay as long as you need. I know you want to get to Wickenburg and your uncle, but there is no rush. Take time to recover properly." "That is very kind, but I have already imposed on your hospitality so much. I should send word to my uncle. Let him know I am safe. He will be worried if I do not arrive as expected." "I will ride into town this afternoon and speak with him myself. Explain what happened. Let him know you are here and safe." Jacob looked at her seriously. "I want you to stay at least for a few days. You have been through a trauma. Your body and mind need time to recover." Penelope knew he was right, but she also knew that staying here, being near Jacob, would make leaving eventually that much harder. Because she was beginning to realize that she did not want to leave at all. She wanted to stay on this ranch, in this place that felt more like home after one day than Philadelphia had felt in 22 years. "Then I accept with thanks," she said softly. "A few days to recover." Jacob smiled, that transformative expression that made Penelope's heart skip. "Good. That is settled then." He rode out an hour later, heading to Wickenburg to find Thomas Kane. Penelope watched him go from the porch, feeling strangely bereft without his presence. Maria joined her, wiping her hands on her apron. He will be back before dark, she said knowingly. Jacob is not a man to stay away long once he has something important to come back to. Penelope felt her cheeks warm. I am just a guest, Maria, if you say so. Maria's tone was gently teasing. Come, help me with the garden. I have vegetables to pick, and the work will help you feel useful. The afternoon passed pleasantly. Penelope helped Maria in the garden, learning the names of plants that thrived in the desert climate. She met the other ranch hands, Ben and Charlie, who were polite and respectful, showing no signs of improper curiosity about her presence. She explored the ranch, admiring the sturdy construction of the barn and the obvious care taken with the animals. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Penelope heard the sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leaped even before she saw Jacob riding toward the house, sitting tall and easy in the saddle. He had removed his vest in the heat, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing tanned forearms. Penelope found herself staring, then quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own reaction. Jacob dismounted in one fluid motion and walked toward where she stood by the corral. Your uncle sends his regards, he said without preamble. He was worried when you did not arrive yesterday, but he is relieved you are safe. I explained everything that happened, and he wants you to know there is no rush for you to come to town. He trusts you are in good hands here. That is kind of him. He also sent these. Jacob handed her a bundle. Some clothes he thought might fit, and your personal items from the bags your horse was carrying. You found my horse. Penelope opened the bundle eagerly. She was found by a prospector this morning, wandering near a creek about 5 miles west of here. Your uncle posted a reward for her return and the prospector brought her in. She is in fine shape, just a bit skittish from the storm. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. I cannot believe everything worked out. It seems almost impossible after how yesterday began. Sometimes we get lucky. Jacob's voice was warm. Your uncle also insisted on reimbursing me for any expenses and trouble. I told him it was not necessary, but he insisted I at least accept payment for your lodging here. That sounds like Uncle Thomas. He is a proud man, does not like to be indebted. I can respect that. Though honestly, having you here is no trouble at all. Jacob met her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. In fact, it has been the opposite of trouble. Penelope felt her pulse quicken. I feel the same way. They stood there in the golden light of sunset, the ranch quiet around them except for the low murmur of cattle and the distant call of a bird. Penelope knew she should say something, move away, break this moment before it became something more. But she found herself rooted to the spot, held by the intensity in Jacob's blue eyes. Dinner is ready, Maria called from the house, breaking the spell. Come eat before it gets cold. Dinner was a lively affair with all the ranch hands gathered around a long table. The food was simple but delicious, and the conversation flowed easily, full of stories and gentle teasing. Penelope felt welcomed into this makeshift family, accepted without question or judgment. It was so different from the formal dinners she had endured in Philadelphia, where every word was measured and every gesture scrutinized. She sat next to Jacob, acutely aware of his presence, of the occasional brush of his arm against hers, of the way he made sure she had enough food and that her water glass stayed filled. These small attentions spoke of a thoughtfulness that touched her deeply. After dinner, Jacob suggested a walk to help settle the meal. Penelope agreed immediately, grateful for a chance to be alone with him again. They walked toward the corral where the horses dozed in the twilight. I have been thinking, Jacob said as they walked. About what you said earlier about things feeling right. I have not been able to stop thinking about it. Penelope's heart began to race. Neither have I. I know we just met. I know this is all happening very fast, but I cannot shake the feeling that you were meant to be caught in that storm. That I was meant to find you." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Does that sound crazy?" "No." Penelope's voice was barely a whisper. "It sounds exactly right. I am not good with words. I am just a cowboy who works with his hands and spends most of his time with cattle and horses. I do not have much to offer beyond this ranch and an uncertain future." Jacob took a breath, as though gathering courage. "But from the moment I saw you struggling through that storm, something changed in me. And when you said I was your shelter, I realized I want to be that for you. Not just for one night, but for as long as you will let me." Penelope felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Jacob, I feel the same way. It terrifies me because it is so sudden, so intense. But I have never felt anything this real before. When I look at you, I see home. I see the future I did not even know I wanted." Jacob reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped her tears with his thumb. "Do not cry, unless those are happy tears. They are." Penelope laughed through her tears. "They absolutely are. Can I kiss you?" Jacob's voice was rough with emotion. "I have wanted to since I first saw you in the light this morning, looking at me like I was something worth looking at." "Yes," Penelope breathed. "Please, yes." Jacob cupped her face in his hands, those rough, capable hands that had pulled her from a storm and kept her safe. He leaned in slowly, as though she were something precious that might break. When his lips finally met hers, Penelope felt the world tilt and resettle, everything clicking into place with perfect clarity. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Then it deepened, became something more certain, more passionate. Penelope's hands came up to grip his shirt, anchoring herself to him as she kissed him back with all the emotion flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just for a few days. Stay here with me. I know it is too soon to ask. I know we barely know each other. But I am asking anyway. Stay and give us a chance to see where this leads." Penelope knew she should be cautious, should take time to think, should be practical and sensible. But her mother's death had taught her that life was too short and too precious to waste on caution. When something real and good appeared, you grabbed hold of it with both hands. "I will stay," she said. "For as long as you want me. That might be forever." Jacob's smile was brilliant in the twilight. "I should warn you about that. Forever sounds perfect." They kissed again, and Penelope felt a joy she had not known existed. This cowboy, this storm, this strange and wonderful turn of fate had brought her exactly where she needed to be. The next few days established a new rhythm on the ranch. Penelope helped Maria with the household tasks, learning to cook meals for hungry ranch hands and to make bread that rose properly in the dry desert air. She tended the vegetable garden, collected eggs from the chickens, and even learned to milk the cow Jacob kept for fresh dairy. But the best parts of her days were the times she spent with Jacob. He taught her to ride the gentler horses, guiding her with endless patience as she learned to sit properly in the saddle and communicate with the animal beneath her. They rode out to check on the cattle together, and he showed her every corner of his land, sharing his dreams for expansion and improvement. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked for hours, sharing their histories, their hopes, their fears. Jacob told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to rope cattle before he could properly read, about the grief of losing both his parents too young. Penelope spoke of growing up in a city that never slept, of feeling trapped by expectations and social rules, of wanting something more authentic and real. They kissed often, stealing moments when no one was watching, though Maria and Tomás were clearly aware of what was developing between them and approved wholeheartedly. Each kiss felt like a promise, a seal on the future they were beginning to imagine together. A week after the storm, Penelope's Uncle Thomas rode out to the ranch to visit. He was a broad man in his 50s with Penelope's same green eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded her achingly of her mother. "Niece," he said, pulling her into a bear hug, "you gave me quite a scare. When I got word about the storm and you had not arrived, I feared the worst. I am sorry to have worried you, Uncle Thomas, but as you can see, I am perfectly fine. Better than fine from what I can see." Thomas looked meaningfully at Jacob, who stood a respectful distance away. "This young man has been singing your praises all over town, telling anyone who will listen about the brave woman from Philadelphia who survived the storm." Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "He has been more than kind. Kind enough that you have not come to town yet, even though you have been recovered for days." Thomas's tone was teasing but not accusatory. "Should I be concerned about your reputation, Penelope?" "No, Uncle. Maria has been here the entire time, and everyone has treated me with complete respect and propriety. I have just been enjoying learning about ranch life. And enjoying the rancher himself, I would wager." Thomas laughed at her flustered expression. "Do not look so shocked. I have eyes, girl. And I am not disapproving. Jacob Steele is known as an honest, hard-working man. If you have formed an attachment to him, I think you could do far worse." "We have become close, yes." Penelope decided to be direct. "In fact, I am considering staying on the ranch rather than coming to work in your store. I know that is not what we planned, and I feel terrible about changing arrangements, but you have found something here you did not expect to find." Thomas's expression softened. "Your mother would tell you to follow your heart, Penelope. Lord knows she did when she married your father against her family's wishes. I am not going to stand in your way if this is truly what you want." "It is." Penelope was surprised by how certain she felt. "I know it seems fast, but Uncle, I have never been so sure of anything in my life." "Then you have my blessing, for what it is worth." Thomas pulled her in for another hug. "Just promise you will come visit me in town sometimes. I was looking forward to getting to know my niece better." "I promise. And thank you, Uncle Thomas, for understanding." Thomas stayed for lunch, during which he and Jacob talked business, cattle prices, and the challenges of ranching in Arizona territory. Penelope was pleased to see that they got along well. The older man clearly approving of Jacob's work, ethic, and practical approach to problem solving. After Thomas left, promising to spread the word in town that Penelope was staying at the ranch as Maria's assistant to preserve propriety, Jacob found Penelope in the garden. "That went well," he said, a note of relief in his voice. "I was worried your uncle might insist you come to town immediately. Uncle Thomas is more progressive than most. He wants me to be happy." Penelope stood and brushed dirt from her borrowed skirt. "Though I suppose we should think about how this looks. A single woman living on a ranch with a single man, even with Maria and Tomás here. People will talk." Jacob was quiet for a moment, then took her hands in his. "Then maybe we should give them something proper to talk about." Penelope's breath caught. "What do you mean, marry me?" The words were simple, direct, so utterly Jacob. "I know it is soon. I know we have only known each other a week, but I have never been more certain of anything. I love you, Penelope Kane. I think I loved you from the moment you said I was your shelter. Marry me and make this ranch your home. Make me the luckiest man in Arizona territory." Tears flooded Penelope's eyes again. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. I love you too, Jacob, so much it terrifies me. Do not be terrified." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We will figure everything out together." That is what love means, right? Being each other's shelter, no matter what storms come. You are my shelter, Penelope repeated, the words that had started everything. Always. They were married 3 weeks later in Wickenburg's small church. Thomas walked Penelope down the aisle, beaming with pride. Maria and Tomás stood up with them, along with the other ranch hands. Half the town attended, curious about the Philadelphia woman who had captured their most eligible bachelor's heart. Penelope wore a simple white dress that Maria had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Jacob wore his best suit, which he confessed to Penelope he had owned for 5 years without occasion to wear. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothes but devastatingly handsome. When the preacher asked if Jacob took Penelope to be his wife, his "I do" was loud and clear and certain. When Penelope gave her own vow, her voice shook with emotion but never wavered. They exchanged simple gold bands, all they could afford, but to Penelope, hers was more precious than any diamond. The kiss that sealed their marriage was chaste given their audience, but the promise in it made Penelope's knees weak. They were married. This incredible man was her husband. She was home. The townspeople threw them a celebration that lasted well into the evening with food and music and dancing. Penelope met dozens of people, trying to remember all their names and relationships. Everyone was welcoming, happy to meet the woman who had finally convinced Jacob Steele to settle down. "You are good for him," more than one person told her. "We have never seen him smile so much." As the sun set and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Jacob leaned down to whisper in Penelope's ear. "Want to slip away? I am eager to get my wife alone." Penelope felt a shiver of anticipation run through her. "Yes, please." They made their excuses and rode back to the ranch under a canopy of stars. Maria and Tomás had tactfully decided to spend the night in town, giving the newlyweds privacy. The ranch house was quiet and empty when they arrived, lit only by the moon and the lamp Jacob carried into the bedroom. What followed was tender and passionate, awkward and perfect, exactly as a wedding night between two people deeply in love should be. Jacob was gentle with Penelope, patient with her inexperience, making sure she felt cherished and safe. And Penelope discovered a boldness she had not known she possessed, a desire to know and be known completely by this man who had become her everything. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin against skin, hearts beating in tandem. "I cannot believe you are mine," Jacob murmured against her hair. "Sometimes I think I am going to wake up and find that the storm, meeting you, all of this was just a dream. If it is a dream, we are both having it." Penelope traced patterns on his chest, marveling at the intimacy between them. "And I never want to wake up. You will not have to. This is real, Penelope. You and me, this life we are building together, it is as real as it gets." The months that followed were among the happiest of Penelope's life. She threw herself into ranch life with an enthusiasm that surprised even her. She learned to tend sick cattle, to help with branding when needed, to keep the ranch books and manage supplies. She discovered she had a knack for training horses, particularly the difficult ones, with a patience and gentleness that earned their trust. She also worked hard to make the house a true home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted flowers around the porch, filled the rooms with small touches that made the space warm and inviting. Jacob frequently told her he loved coming home at the end of a long day to find her there, making everything better just by existing in his space. Their love deepened with each passing day. They learned each other's rhythms, moods, and needs. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they always worked through their disagreements with honesty and respect. At night, they made love with increasing passion and confidence, learning what brought each other pleasure. By Christmas, 5 months after their wedding, Penelope knew she was pregnant. She waited until Christmas morning to tell Jacob, wrapping a tiny pair of knitted baby booties as his gift. When he opened the package and understood what it meant, Jacob's face went through a remarkable transformation from confusion to shock to absolute joy. "A baby," his voice cracked. "We are having a baby, we are." Penelope was crying and laughing at the same time. "Are you happy?" Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Happy does not begin to cover it. Penelope, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I do not know what I did to deserve all this, but I swear I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret it. You are my shelter, remember? You always will be." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Penelope remained active, helping around the ranch as long as she was able. Maria fussed over her constantly, making sure she rested enough and ate properly. Jacob was alternately excited and terrified, buying books about babies and child rearing, consulting with every parent he knew for advice. Their son was born in late July, during another storm, though nowhere near as violent as the one that had brought his parents together. Jacob held Penelope's hand through the long hours of labor, and when their boy finally entered the world with a lusty cry, there were tears streaming down the new father's face. "He is perfect," Jacob breathed, looking at the tiny, red-faced infant with awe. "Penelope, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James Thomas Steele, after Jacob's father and Penelope's uncle. Little James was a healthy, happy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined temperament. Jacob was a devoted father from the first moment, involved in every aspect of his son's care in a way that was unusual for the time, but perfectly suited to who he was. Life on the ranch continued to grow and prosper. With Penelope's help managing the business side of things, Jacob was able to expand his operation significantly. They bought more land, increased their herd, and hired additional hands. The Steele Ranch became known throughout the region for quality cattle and fair dealing. Penelope maintained her connection to Wickenburg, becoming active in the church and helping to establish a small school for the growing number of children in the area. She never forgot where she came from, but she was firmly rooted in the West now, her Philadelphia past feeling like it belonged to a different person entirely. 2 years after James was born, they welcomed a daughter, Emma Rose, who had her mother's green eyes and a sunny disposition that made everyone who met her smile. Jacob was utterly besotted with his little girl, proving that tough cowboys could be wrapped around tiny fingers. Then came another son, Daniel, and finally another daughter, Sarah, completing their family. The ranch house that had once seemed spacious now overflowed with noise and laughter and the controlled chaos of 4 children. Jacob added rooms to accommodate their growing family, and Penelope filled them with love and life. Through it all, through the challenges of raising children and running a ranch, through drought years and good years, through sickness and health, Penelope and Jacob's love remained the foundation on which everything else was built. They still stole moments alone when they could, still looked at each other with the same intensity they had felt in that cave during the storm. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they took a rare trip alone, leaving the children with Maria and Tomas. Jacob brought Penelope back to the place where he had found her, where the small cave still stood against the desert hillside. "You ever think about that day?" Jacob asked as they stood looking at their unlikely shelter. "About how different things could have been?" "I think about it often." Penelope leaned against him, feeling the same safety she had felt that first night. "If the storm had been worse, if you had not been there, if I had died out here, so many things that could have gone wrong. But they did not. We found each other and everything changed. You saved me that day, Jacob, not just from the storm. You saved me from a life that would never have made me truly happy. You gave me love, adventure, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything. Jacob turned her to face him, his blue eyes still as bright as they had been a decade ago. You saved me too, Penelope. I was content before you, but I was not alive. You taught me what it means to truly live, to love completely, to build something meaningful. I was your shelter from the storm, but you became my shelter from loneliness. They kissed there, in front of the cave that had sheltered them both, sealing 10 years of love and promising countless more to come. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges and joys. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. James became a skilled rancher like his father, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operations. Emma surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for teaching and opened her own school in Wickenburg. Daniel developed a passion for horses, becoming a renowned breeder. And Sarah, the baby, inherited her mother's head for business and helped expand the ranch's operations even further. Penelope and Jacob grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and full lives. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming something even more precious with the passage of time. They became pillars of the community, respected and loved by all who knew them. Their story, the tale of how a cowboy saved a woman from a storm and they fell in love, became something of a local legend, told and retold, embellished with each telling. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, they renewed their vows in the same church where they had first married. Penelope, now 72 but still beautiful in Jacob's eyes, wore white again. Jacob, 76 and still strong despite his years, held her hands with the same tenderness he had shown that first night. "You are still my shelter," Penelope said when it was her turn to speak, her voice carrying clearly through the packed church. "Through every storm life has thrown at us, you have been my constant, my safe harbor, my home. I love you more today than I did 50 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Jacob's voice was thick with emotion when he responded. "You walked into my life during a storm, and you brought the sunshine with you. Every day with you has been a gift I never expected and will never take for granted. You are my shelter, my love, my everything, and you always will be." They kissed to thunderous applause, and if the kiss was gentler than those first passionate embraces, it was no less meaningful. The celebration lasted all day and into the evening, with food and music and dancing just like their wedding 50 years before. Penelope and Jacob sat together, holding hands, watching their family celebrate around them. "We did well, did we not?" Penelope said softly, looking at the crowd of people who existed because they had found each other in a desert storm. "We did better than well." Jacob brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "We built something beautiful, Penelope, something that will last long after we are gone. Do you have any regrets? Anything you wish we had done differently?" Jacob considered the question seriously, as he always did. "Not a single one. Every choice we made, every challenge we faced, every moment of joy and sorrow brought us here to this moment, surrounded by all this love. How could I regret any of it? I feel the same way." Penelope rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you, Jacob, for saving me that day. For loving me every day since. For giving me this life. Thank you for saying yes, for staying, for being brave enough to build a life with a cowboy you barely knew." He kissed the top of her head. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Steele." They sat in comfortable silence, two old people who had loved each other through 5 decades of life, still as connected as they had been in that cave during the storm. Around them, their family laughed and celebrated, living proof of the power of love and the beauty of a life well lived. 3 years later, Jacob Steele died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, with Penelope holding his hand. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched over the years. His grave in the small cemetery outside Wickenburg had a simple headstone that read, Jacob Steele, beloved husband, father, and friend. He was shelter in every storm. Penelope missed him with an ache that never fully went away, but she did not retreat into grief. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, sharing stories of the man she had loved for more than 50 years. On the anniversary of the storm that had brought them together, she would ride out to the cave where Jacob had saved her, bringing flowers to leave at the entrance. She would sit for a while, remembering that frightened girl who had been knocked from her horse and the cowboy who had appeared like an answer to a prayer. 5 years after Jacob's death, Penelope joined him. She was 80, and her heart simply stopped one morning while she was sitting on the porch of the ranch house, looking out over land that had been her home for more than half a century. Her funeral was as well attended as Jacob's had been. Her grave was placed next to his, and her headstone read, Penelope Steele, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She found her shelter and gave shelter in return. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each one adding to the legacy that Jacob and Penelope had built together. Their story was never forgotten, kept alive by their descendants and by the community that had watched their love story unfold. And sometimes, during desert storms, people claimed to see two figures standing together near a small cave, holding each other against the wind, proving that some loves are strong enough to weather any storm, even death itself. The Steele Ranch thrived for generations to come, each new steward honoring the foundation laid by Jacob and Penelope. Their children passed down stories of how their parents met, of the storm and the cave, of love that bloomed in the most unlikely circumstances. These stories became family legend, told to each new generation of Steele children. James, the eldest, lived to be 93, never leaving the ranch he loved. He married a woman from Wickenburg and had 7 children of his own, teaching each of them the lessons his father had taught him. Work hard, deal fairly, and love deeply. He kept his father's old hat, worn and battered, in a place of honor in his home, a reminder of where he came from. Emma's school grew into one of the finest educational institutions in Arizona Territory, and later, the state of Arizona. She never married, dedicating her life to education and to the hundreds of students who passed through her doors. But she always said she had seen the perfect example of marriage in her parents and could not settle for anything less. Daniel bred horses that were sought after throughout the West. Combining his father's practical knowledge with innovative techniques he learned from books his mother bought him. He married twice, finding love again after his first wife died in childbirth, proving that his parents' example taught him that love was always worth the risk. Sarah took the ranch's success and expanded it into a business empire that made the Steele name known throughout the territory. She was fierce and brilliant and kind, with her mother's mind and her father's heart. She married a lawyer from Phoenix and had 3 daughters, each one as strong-willed as their mother. The cave where Jacob had saved Penelope became something of a shrine for the family. Each generation of Steeles made pilgrimages there, leaving small tokens and saying prayers of thanks for the storm that had brought their family into being. The local community eventually erected a small marker there, commemorating the place where Jacob and Penelope's love story began. As Arizona changed from territory to state, as the wild frontier became civilized, as towns grew into cities and cattle trails became highways, the story of Jacob and Penelope remained constant. It became the kind of story people told to remind themselves that true love existed, that some things were worth believing in, that storms sometimes brought blessings in disguise. The ranch house that Jacob built with his own hands and that Penelope made into a home stood for over a century, carefully maintained by each successive generation. Inside, photographs chronicled the family's growth, but the place of honor always went to one particular photograph. Jacob and Penelope on their 50th wedding anniversary, standing in front of the church, holding hands, looking at each other with the same love that had sparked in a cave during a storm. Young Steeles grew up hearing about how grandmother Penelope had left everything she knew in Philadelphia to build a life in the wild Arizona territory. They learned about how grandfather Jacob had ridden out into a storm to rescue a woman he did not know and ended up finding his soulmate. The story taught them about courage, about following their hearts, about the importance of being someone's shelter when storms came. The love story of Jacob and Penelope Steele became woven into the fabric of Wickenburg's history. The town grew around the ranch they had helped establish, and the Steele family remained central to the community for generations. Schools, libraries, and hospitals bore their name, funded by the prosperity they had built and the generosity they had exemplified. But beyond the material legacy, beyond the land and the money and the buildings, the greatest thing Jacob and Penelope left behind was the proof that love could transform everything. That two people from different worlds could find each other in the midst of chaos and build something lasting. That being someone's shelter meant more than just physical protection. It meant emotional support, unwavering commitment, and the kind of deep partnership that made life worth living. Their grave site in the cemetery outside Wickenburg became a place where couples came to exchange vows, believing that the blessing of Jacob and Penelope's enduring love might touch their own relationships. On Valentine's Day, flowers covered their graves, left by romantic souls who wanted to honor a love story that had transcended time. In the Steele family, it became tradition that when someone fell in love, truly and deeply in love, they would visit the cave where it all began. They would stand in that small shelter and think about the courage it took for Penelope to trust a stranger in the midst of a storm, the certainty Jacob must have felt to propose after only knowing her a few weeks, the faith they both had that love could sustain them through all the challenges ahead. And every single person who made that pilgrimage reported the same thing. Standing in that cave, they felt something. A warmth, a certainty, a sense of being in a place where something miraculous had happened. Whether it was the lingering spirit of Jacob and Penelope's love or simply the power of the story itself, none could say. But all agreed it changed them, made them believe more firmly in their own love stories. The Steele Ranch operated continuously for 143 years, finally closing only when the last descendant who wanted to run it retired, and decided to preserve the land instead as a nature conservancy. But even then, the main house was maintained as a museum, dedicated to telling the story of Jacob and Penelope, and the family they created. Visitors came from all over the world to see the place where their love story unfolded. They walked through rooms where 4 generations of Steeles had been born, where countless meals had been shared, where love and laughter and tears had soaked into the very walls. They saw the simple furniture Jacob had made, the quilts Penelope had sewn, the photographs and letters that documented a life fully lived. But the most popular exhibit was always the recreation of that first meeting during the storm. using artifacts from the period and detailed accounts passed down through the family. Museum curators created a display that showed the cave, the storm, the moment when everything changed. And there, on a placard, were the words that had started it all. "You are my shelter now." Those 5 words became famous, quoted at weddings and anniversaries, printed on everything from coffee mugs to inspirational posters. But for those who truly understood the story, they meant something deeper. They represented the fundamental human need to find safety, love, and home in another person. They spoke to the courage it took to be vulnerable, to admit need, to accept help. And they honored the beautiful responsibility of becoming someone's shelter, of being worthy of that trust. As decades turned to centuries, as the world changed in ways Jacob and Penelope could never have imagined, their love story endured. It was taught in schools as an example of frontier romance. It was referenced in books and films about the Old West. It inspired countless people to believe in love at first sight, in the power of fate, in the possibility of building something beautiful even in harsh circumstances. And on stormy nights in Wickenburg, Arizona, old-timers still swore they could see 2 figures standing together near a small cave, a tall man and a woman in a torn dress, holding each other against the wind. Whether it was truth or legend, none could say for certain. But everyone agreed it was a beautiful story, the kind that reminded people of what really mattered in life: love, courage, faith, partnership, home. These were the gifts Jacob gave Penelope when he pulled her from the storm. These were the gifts Penelope gave Jacob when she chose to stay. And these were the gifts they both gave to every person who heard their story and believed that, yes, true love really could bloom in the middle of a desert storm and last forever. The story of Jacob and Penelope Steele proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead directly to the best. That being lost can mean being found. That storms pass, but love endures. That being someone's shelter is the highest calling and greatest privilege a person can have. And in a small cave near Wickenburg, Arizona, where 2 people once waited out a storm together and fell in love, their spirits remained, eternal testimony to the transformative power of love and the beauty of becoming someone's shelter, now and always.